The mountains were wrapped in a mist that clung to the pines like unspoken prayers, and in the valley below the monastery bells echoed with their familiar tone, steady as the rhythm of breath. For generations, the monks had walked the same worn stone paths, turning prayer wheels, lighting incense that curled toward the dawn sky, reciting the verses passed to them by those who had come before. Among them was Ananda, a quiet figure with calm eyes and a steady gait, known not for his eloquence, but for the stillness that seemed to gather around him like the early morning dew. He had been born in the shadow of these mountains, raised on the teachings of detachment and the endless cycle of birth and rebirth, told that desire was the root of suffering and that peace was found only in letting go of all that bound the heart. Yet as the seasons passed, and the snow gave way to rain, and the rain to the bright green of spring, a subtle restlessness began to stir within him, like a distant drumbeat beneath a calm sea. It was not discontent with his brothers, nor with the rituals they kept, but with the quiet question that came in the hours before dawn, when the world was silent. Was the path they walked truly the end of seeking, or only another turning in a wheel without center? On a night when the moon hung low over the peaks and the river whispered against the stones, a traveler came to the monastery gates. He was not dressed as the monks were. His robe was simple, and his sandals dusty from a long road. But his eyes held a warmth that did not press, a certainty that did not weigh heavy. He spoke of one God, unseen yet nearer than the jugular vein, of prophets who had come not to bind men in endless cycles, but to call them back to the one who had no equal. Ananda listened as the other monks asked questions, some with curiosity, others with the polite dismissal of those who had long ago decided what was and was not worth hearing. But for him the words fell not as challenge but as rain on dry ground. The traveler stayed only a night, leaving at dawn with the rising sun at his back, but he left behind a small book, its pages worn and its script foreign, yet flowing like the river in spring. Ananda began to read in the hours when the others slept, tracing the lines with his finger, whispering the meanings as he learned them from an elder who could speak both tongues. There were verses of mercy that encompassed the heavens and the earth, of guidance sent as light upon hearts that had grown heavy, of a day when all cycles would cease and each soul would stand before its Creator. These words did not tell him to abandon peace. They called him to a peace that was living, that breathed and answered, that forgave. The nights grew longer in his heart, not with darkness, but with the stretch of something vast awakening. He began to walk further from the temple walls, to sit by the river where the reeds bent in the wind, to look upon the stars and wonder if the wheel he had always turned was not a circle after all, but a door waiting to open. The rains of late spring gave way to the soft brightness of summer, and with the warm winds came another traveler, this one from lands far to the west, where the deserts stretched beyond the horizon and the cities gleamed beneath the sun. His name was Yusuf, a merchant by trade, but a student of the heart by choice, born among the sands of Arabia, where the call to prayer rose each dawn like a promise kept. He came not to debate nor to conquer, but to pass through the mountain pass on his way to distant markets. And yet the monks welcomed him as they did all wayfarers, with tea brewed from wild herbs, a place to rest, and questions carried by polite curiosity. Yusuf was unlike the wandering teachers they had known. He did not speak with the weight of one trying to impress, nor with the heat of one trying to win. He listened more than he spoke, his words few but rooted, and his gaze was steady, without judgment. When they asked him of his faith, he told them not of empires or force, but of a mercy that reached from the highest sky to the quietest heart, of a book that spoke to both king and shepherd, of a prophet who had walked among men with gentleness and truth. Ananda watched him in the courtyard, where the pines cast long shadows, and what struck him was not the eloquence of his speech, but the simplicity of his acts. How he fed the birds before eating himself. How he mended the strap of a young monk's sandal without being asked. How he rose before dawn to wash and pray, while the mist still clung to the stones. There was no claim of superiority in him, yet a strength that did not need to shout. The monks began to sit with him in the evenings, the incense smoke curling like thin clouds between them. They asked why he spoke of only one God when the world seemed filled with many paths, and he smiled, not as one who dismisses, but as one who remembers. The paths may seem many, he said, but truth is like the sun. There is only one, though its light touches every peak and valley. His honesty disarmed them, for he did not say theirs was worthless, nor that they were lost. He said only that a clearer water waited beyond the mist. Ananda felt his heart tilt, not with haste, but with recognition, as if the sound of the river below the monastery had suddenly been given a name. In the nights that followed, he found himself replaying Yusuf's words, not because they were forced upon him, but because they lingered like the fragrance of rain on stone. The other monks, too, were moved in ways they could not quite name. Their debates grew softer, their questions deeper, and some began to wonder whether the peace they had sought by turning inward might yet be found by turning upward. The days that followed Yusuf's visit unfolded like the first light of dawn spreading across the mountains, quiet at first, then steady, undeniable. He did not press them with long sermons, nor demand they abandon all they had known. He shared what he carried, verses of the Quran written in his neat hand, stories of mercy and justice, the words of the prophet who walked gently among people, mending hearts as he mended sandals, feeding the hungry, freeing the captive, reminding them that the Creator was near and that no prayer was lost in the wind. The monks gathered by the river bank, now not only to chant as they once did, but to listen. They asked Yusuf about prayer, and he showed them how the body bends and the forehead touches the earth, not as a sign of defeat, but of finding the place one truly belongs. They asked him about the fast, and he spoke of hunger as a mirror, showing what the soul depends on and what it can let go. The elder monk, wise in years and careful with his words, did not scold the young for their curiosity. Instead, he watched with quiet eyes as they tasted a different peace, one that did not erase their discipline, but gave it a root. Ananda, more than any, felt the shift, like the slow turning of a wheel that had long been spinning without rest. He began to wake, before the first bell, to wash his face and hands in the cold stream, to stand beside Yusuf as the dawn broke over the peaks. The words of the Quran he had once traced by candlelight now stirred his heart as if they were written not on paper, but within his very breath. There were no grand declarations, no banners raised, only the steady deepening of an understanding. That detachment was not to empty the heart of all ties, but to fill it with the one tie that frees all others. the monks began to adopt small acts, feeding the travelers without expectation, sharing their harvest more freely, letting go of old disputes that had lingered for years, in silence. Some spoke among themselves of the Shahada, the testimony Yusuf had mentioned, the simple but profound witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. They did not yet say it aloud, but its echo began to move among them, like the mountain wind before the rain. It was not a storm, it was a clearing. The monastery bells still rang, the incense still curled, but a new rhythm now accompanied them. A rhythm of remembrance, soft yet growing, that pointed not to the endless wheel but to a path that had a beginning and a return. The mountain paths grew golden as autumn came, each leaf turning with a quiet rustle, each dawn arriving a little slower than the one before. By now, Yusuf had continued his journey, leaving behind only his small book, his smile, and the memory of a man who asked for nothing, yet left a seed in every heart he met. The monks returned to their tasks, tending the gardens, sweeping the halls, guiding travelers who came to the valley. But something had shifted beneath the surface of their days, as though the stones themselves had softened. Ananda rose each morning before the bells, his steps leading him not to the old shrine but to the open courtyard, where the stars still lingered. There he whispered the words he had learned, letting them settle in the cool air. A remembrance that was neither loud nor hidden, but alive. Others joined him over time, not with ceremony, not with debate, but with the same quiet certainty that comes when the snow begins to melt and the river runs a little clearer each day. They no longer argued about what to call the path. They began to walk it. The meals they shared became simpler, yet more nourishing. The disputes that once circled endlessly in the halls faded like smoke, carried off by the mountain breeze. A few among them chose to journey eastward, to learn more, to meet others who prayed in the same manner. They returned with stories of cities where the call to prayer rose like the sun, and of markets where no one was turned away, hungry. The elder smiled at their tales, his hands worn from years of turning wheels that now sat still. "It is not the wheel that turns the world," he said one evening, "but the one who made it." Winter came again, wrapping the peaks in white, but the valley did not feel cold as it once had. The monks had found a new rhythm. They prayed, they worked, they welcomed, they listened, and though few among them ever declared it aloud with the weight of a crowd, many had spoken the Shahada in the silence of their own breath, their hearts aligned with what they now knew to be the true path. Ananda, now older, stood by the river where he had once questioned everything. The water flowed as it always had, yet it no longer carried him in circles. It led him forward, toward the one who had always been near. The bells still rang in the distance, but their echo no longer bound him. It was simply another sound in a world full of sounds, all under the same sky. The monastery did not crumble, nor did its gates close. It became a place where the weary could rest, where the hungry were fed, where prayer rose like mist and settled like peace. And so their story was not of sudden conquest or loss, but of gentle return, of souls that laid down their burdens, and in doing so, found the road home.